Hello there. Tonight we are going to travel far beyond the realm of gods and monsters and deep into the myths that weren't told for glory but for comfort. Imagine the crackle of firelight, the hush of distant mountains, and a sky smeared with ancient stars. Tonight, we're not chasing heroes who slay dragons or conquer cities. No, we're slipping into the quieter stories, the ones with sadness in their bones and warmth in their endings. These are the Greek myths you never fell asleep to in school, but maybe always needed. You probably won't survive, by the way. Just thought I should say that. Whether it's a divine curse, a three-headed dog, or being slowly rewritten by literal fire, this isn't the sort of bedtime story where anyone gets out without glowing or turning into marble. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Let me know in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it where you are? I like knowing which corner of the world I'm whispering to tonight. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. It begins in a forge. Not the kind with the hammers clanking and the swords blazing in slow motion like some slow-mo action movie. No, this is quieter, older, the forge of Myene. A village so small that the gods didn't bother naming it on their maps, but the fire burned hot enough to catch their attention anyway. The blacksmith here was not a man. It was a woman named Callista, and her hands did not simply shape metal, they sang to it. Bronze would soften under her gaze, iron twisted gently under her hammer like it was eager to be useful. Some said Ares once wore one of her breastplates into battle. Others said she was half divine or half cursed. Either way, Callista didn't care. She had to forge a hammer and a reason to keep the fire burning. That reason arrived one night in smoke and shadow. Hephaestus himself. Yes, the limping god of the forge, the one who got thrown off Olympus and landed badly, walked into her workshop with no announcement. No lightning, no glowing aura of power. Just the smell of ash and pine sap. Callista didn't bow. Hephaestus didn't smile. But the forge flared hotter than it had in years. 9 months later, Irion was born. He didn't cry. Not a peep. His eyes just opened bright as coals, and the fire leapt in the hearth like it recognized one of its own. The midwives whispered, crossed themselves, said things like touched by the divine, and he won't stay long. Which is not the most encouraging thing to say about a newborn. But Irion did stay. For a while. He grew fast. Too fast. At 5, he could lift his mother's hammer. At 7, he forged a blade so perfect it hummed when left alone. He never lied. Never laughed. Villagers said he was cursed. Children avoided him. Priests turned their backs when he walked by. But Callista, she taught him that fire only obeys those who listen, not those who command. And so he listened. By 16, Irion's forge burned day and night. He made weapons for kings he'd never meet, for wars he'd never fight in. But something deeper stirred. Something older. Something missing. Because the world was getting colder. Not metaphorically like, ugh, people are so cold these days. No, like literally. Hearths were going out, forests stayed frozen even in spring, even goats were shivering in summer, which really messes with your expectations if you're Greek. Scholars blamed the stars, priests said punishment. But everyone quietly agreed the gods had turned their backs on mankind. What they didn't know was that the gods had done more than that. They had taken back the flame. Long ago, Prometheus stole fire from Olympus and gave it to humans. Not just heat, but creativity, thought, rebellion. Everything that made us more than clever animals. But the gods, being the original copyright trolls, got mad. Prometheus was chained to a rock and had his liver eaten daily, which... yeah, not a gentle warning. Since then, the eternal flame, the real one, had been locked away at the top of Olympus. No god dared share it again, not because it was sacred, but because it was dangerous. Still, some whispered that a boy born of fire was coming, that he would return what the gods stole. Irion didn't know any of that. He just knew the forge was harder to stoke. that even his breath wasn't enough. That warmth, real warmth, was slipping away. But Olympus noticed. The divine brazier hidden away in marble and myth flickered for the first time in 1,000 years. Not because a god touched it, but because a boy did. And far away in Delphi, the last oracle stirred in her sleep and whispered through cracked lips, "He will climb. He will take the flame. And he will die." No one told Irion, but he was already dreaming of fire. Already forging something heavier than blades. Already thinking that warmth, real warmth, should belong to everyone again. And up on Olympus, the gods began to watch, not because they were worried, not yet, but because somewhere deep in their golden bones they remembered what happened the last time a mortal came for their fire. And they weren't sure they could stop it again. The fire didn't fade all at once. It disappeared in tiny moments. Hearths that once sparked with a mere glance now needed coaxing. Forests that had burst into spring blossoms turned pale and brittle even in late April. Crops failed quietly without drama, just an emptiness where food used to be. Old women whispered into ash instead of embers. Children pressed cold fingers to cold chimneys, and no one could explain why the warmth was gone. But deep in the forge of mighty Irion noticed something different. It wasn't just the temperature, it was the metal. Iron didn't want to bend. Bronze cracked instead of flowing. The fire in his mother's forge, once wild and responsive, now took longer to catch. It coughed like a sick animal and flickered like it was trying to remember how to burn. Callista said little. She'd seen bad years before, but this wasn't just a bad harvest or a dry season. This was something else. She grew quiet, slept less. Her hands trembled slightly when she held the hammer. Irion asked, "Is it the gods?" She only said, "If it is, they've grown very small." What no one in Myene knew was that across the land similar things were happening. In the grand halls of kings, braziers refused to stay lit. Candles sputtered in temples. Priests claimed it was a divine lesson that mortals had forgotten their place. Scholars charted new stars and declared this was a shift in the cosmos. But in between their words was something simpler and scarier they didn't know. What they also didn't know, couldn't know, was that high atop Mount Olympus, the gods had made a decision centuries ago: no more fire for mankind. Not the real kind. Not the flame Prometheus had stolen and tucked like a secret into the soul of humanity. That gift had been revoked. The eternal flame, once freely dancing in every home, had been sealed away in a brazier that no mortal could see, let alone touch. The gods claimed it was too dangerous, that humans had become too bold, too clever, that giving them fire was like handing a sword to a child. They locked it up, told themselves it was mercy, told themselves they had learned from Prometheus's mistake. But even gods forget their own history, because something started stirring. In forgotten corners of the world, the old magic began to twitch. Dryads felt heat pulsing in tree roots. Nymphs saw flickers of gold darting in cave shadows. In Delphi, the oracle woke screaming. She dreamed of a boy made of flame walking barefoot across frost-covered earth cities, igniting in his wake not from destruction, but from rebirth. His name traveled on wind even before he knew it had become myth Irion. The gods began to whisper. Hephaestus, once Irion's father, kept his silence. He sat in his forge beneath the mountain alone. His divine hands crafted nothing new. He watched the boy through the smoke of his fires, and though he said nothing, his hammer struck with a rhythm that was almost hopeful. But not all gods were pleased. Ares spat into his goblet and declared it arrogance. Athena frowned, her temples growing colder. Hermes only smiled quietly, spinning a coin between his fingers. Zeus said nothing. But the clouds around Olympus thickened. The wind picked up. Lightning cracked more often, and for no reason. The world was preparing for something. And as always, it was a humanity that would stand in the middle of it. Meanwhile, Irion worked. He didn't know the full story, just fragments. Just a growing sense that his forge didn't respond like it used to. That something vital had been taken. That the cold was not just winter, it was forgetting. The people around him muttered about strange dreams. They spoke of waking with frost on their windows, even in high summer. They murmured about a boy in fire, but never quite remembered where they'd heard the name. And still Irian worked. He forged not for kings anymore, but for silence. His creations piled in corners, swords that never dulled, shields that hummed with old magic. But none of it was enough. Something in him called out to the world, and the world was beginning to answer. In one village far to the north, a dying woman lit her hearth with the last splinter of wood. It refused to catch. In despair, she whispered a name, Irian, and the fire leapt to life just once before flickering out again. In a war-torn town, a child drew a boy made of flame on the side of a crumbling temple. No one had told her his name, but she knew it anyway. Back in Maini, Callista grew weaker. She didn't say so. She just stopped working, let the forge sleep longer than usual. Her hair, once streaked with soot and strength, now grew dull. Irian watched, but said nothing. He simply knelt by the fire and listened. He remembered what she taught him: fire obeys those who listen. One morning, before the sun had crested the hills, Irian stood outside the forge. His hands were empty, no hammer, no sword. He looked up at the sky, not searching, just asking. And the clouds moved, just slightly, but they moved. That was when he knew. The fire he needed, the fire that the world needed, was not in Maini anymore. It had been taken, locked away, hidden like a shameful secret, and if the gods would not return it, he would take it. He didn't tell Callista. She wouldn't have stopped him, but she might have followed, and Irian knew this was a path for one. He packed nothing. No food, no armor, just the coals of the forge wrapped in cloth still warm. He walked, past towns that trembled in the cold, past rivers frozen too early, past temples where the flames never stayed lit. He walked, and as he did, something strange happened. Torches near him burned brighter. Hearths glowed faintly as he passed. Birds, long silent, began to sing again. Small things, easily missed, but not by the gods. They watched. Hermes tilted his head. Athena sharpened her spear. Zeus clenched a bolt of lightning but didn't throw it, because the divine brazier, sealed in marble, untouched for centuries, had flickered. Not because a god had called to it, because a boy had, and that terrified them, because fire, once it remembers who it belongs to, is very hard to control. Irian didn't stop. He climbed. Not Olympus, not yet. First he went to Delphi. The oracle waited. Not outside. Not in a temple lit with incense and gold. She waited below in a cave where the air trembled and the past lingered like breath. She sat on a throne of cracked stone. Her eyes were blind, but they stared straight at him. "You will climb," she said. "You will take the flame, and you will die." Irian didn't flinch. He'd already started burning. Delphi did not welcome visitors anymore. The sacred springs had run dry. The temples were quiet, overgrown, and cracked. What once echoed with chants and divine proclamations now lay silent under vines. Ivy twisted around columns like fingers unwilling to let go. Birds didn't sing here. Even the wind seemed to whisper more slowly, as though it feared waking something best left asleep. Irian entered the abandoned sanctuary without hesitation. He stepped lightly, not from fear, but from instinct, like a man walking through the dreams of a god who might still be half awake. He made his way down to the heart of the mountain, where the oracle sat alone. She wore robes, faded to a violet gray, and her skin looked like pressed ash, brittle and soft at once. Her eyes, blind to the world, burned with storms beneath their stillness. He didn't speak. She inhaled sharply before he even took a second step, as if drawing his essence into herself, like a flame snapping back into a dying wick. "Irian," she hissed. No name had been spoken. "You will climb the mountain, you will take the flame, and you will die." No metaphor, no cryptic verse, just doom delivered like fact. He stood there silent. Not because he was shocked. He wasn't. He had known somewhere deep inside that this wouldn't be a story with a gentle ending, but hearing it aloud, the way her voice cracked like scorched parchment, made it real. He asked quietly, "Is there any other way?" She turned her head toward him as if amused. "The gods will oppose you, the world will demand your failure. The flame what you seek does not belong to mortals." "But it once did," he said, "and look what it cost." Irian clenched his fists. "Then let me pay the price. The oracle smiled not kindly, but with the exhaustion of someone who had watched the same story play out too many times. She stood slowly, limbs moving like smoke caught in an old wind. Her feet never made a sound against the stone. "You already are." Then her voice vanished. Her lips moved, but only smoke poured out. The chamber darkened. The thunder outside, which had been rumbling faintly all day, rose like something older than weather. For a moment, the mountain itself seemed to breathe a low exhale that made the stone tremble beneath Irian's boots. And just as suddenly all was still. The oracle slumped back into her seat, mouth open, eyes glowing faintly but dimming. The prophecy was done. Irian didn't bow. He didn't speak another word. He just turned and left, but her voice followed him not in sound but in memory. He would hear her words in the rhythm of hammer on anvil, in the flicker of flames in the spaces between breaths. He was not chosen, he had volunteered, and now Olympus was watching. But Olympus was not a place that one could simply climb. Before anyone could ascend to Olympus, they first had to be recognized by the mountain. Olympus did not kneel for mortals. You earned every inch, and before you could go up, you had to go down. Because at the root of Olympus beneath the mountain's base was a gate not carved from stone or guarded by bronze soldiers. No, this gate was older. It was sealed with silence and locked with something heavier than chain's fear. And at its threshold lay a beast, a story, a warning in fur and fangs. Cerberus, the hound of Hades. 3 heads, 1 duty, no mercy. No one could ascend Olympus without first touching death. That was the rule. The gods never said it aloud, but it lived in every tale, Prometheus, Orpheus, even Heracles. Before you reach for the heavens, you must know what waits in the dark. Irian understood. He did not try to bargain. He did not come armed. He came prepared. He spent 3 days in silence. No words, just fire and metal. He forged not a weapon but a collar. It was made of obsidian iron, and the last ember from his mother's forge still glowing faintly, still whispering home. On it he etched 3 words. Not spells, not commands. Memory, loyalty, grief. 1 for each head. On the 4th morning he stood before the cave, its mouth wide and black, leading downward into forever. The wind there didn't bite the skin, it scraped the soul. The air didn't smell of death, but of forgotten prayers, the kind whispered with trembling lips beside dying fires, the kind no one expected to be answered. Irian entered. He walked deeper and deeper past bones that glowed faintly, past torches that lit themselves without flame, until he heard it. Breathing, slow, heavy, rhythmic, like 3 storms sleeping together. He stepped into a clearing carved by time and terror. Cerberus lay coiled on a bed of ash and bone, each head twitching in its own rhythm. The fur was darker than absence. Its eyes were closed, but the ears moved tuned to something beneath the world. Irian did not draw his sword. He knelt. He placed the collar on the ground. And then he hummed, just a simple tune, a lullaby, the one his mother used to sing when the nights were too loud and the forge was too quiet, the one about home and warm bread and a fire that never went out. The left head stirred. The right head snarled and paused. The middle head opened its amber eye. They listened. And slowly, Irian slid the collar around their necks. Memory, loyalty, grief. Each head bowed, not in submission, but in recognition. Cerberus exhaled, and the gate opened. No roar, no growl. Just the soft sound of stone shifting to allow something impossible. Death had been touched, and death had stepped aside. The path up Olympus was not a path. No trail, no markers, no steps carved by kindly hikers. It was sheer rock, wind that screamed without sound, air that felt like judgment. Irian climbed, not with certainty, with instinct. His hands bled, his breath burned, his heart now touched by flame and prophecy beat too loudly in his ears. The mountain did not welcome him. It resisted. Rocks slid from beneath his boots. Cliffs shifted. At one point he reached for a handhold that wasn't there and nearly fell. Only a sudden pulse from his chest, hot steady, saved him. The flame Hermes warned of had begun to awaken. He was burning, from the inside out, and still he climbed. Every step a question. Every breath a defiance. And then without warning someone was there, not above him, next to him, as if he'd been there the whole time. Hermes. The trickster, the messenger, the one who never speaks plainly and never appears without a reason. He wore a traveler's cloak, his sandals laced with feathers, a crooked grin on his face, Well, Hermes said, spinning a coin between his fingers, I thought you'd be taller. Irion kept climbing. I know why you're here, Hermes said, walking beside him without ever moving his feet. You want to bring fire back to the mortals. Sweet, noble, stupid. Irion paused, then stopped me. Oh no, Hermes laughed. I'm not here to stop you. I'm here to make sure you understand the deal. He gestured to the sky, to the path ahead. You're walking into the god's vault, into a story that doesn't belong to you. Irion met his gaze, and yet here I am. Hermes' grin faded. You're trying to finish what Prometheus started, he said. But Prometheus didn't survive. You won't either. Irion's voice was steady. Then I'll be what comes next. Hermes touched his chest, 2 fingers gently, and whispered, then here's my gift. Pain seared through Irion. Not flesh, soul. Like a thread had been twisted, like something divine had been cauterized. The fire you seek, Hermes murmured, will burn everything you are. Then he vanished. The storm rolled in, and Irion climbed higher, cursed, scorched, but unshaken. The curse Hermes left in Irion's chest wasn't loud. Not at first. It didn't scream like Zeus's lightning or roar like Poseidon's seas. No, it crept slowly, quietly, like frost across a window pane. A tightness when he breathed. A dull heat under his ribs, a throb that echoed with every heartbeat. As though something inside him had been rewired, or was trying to escape. The higher he climbed, the worse it became. Not like a wound, not even like sickness, more like erosion, as if piece by piece the man he'd always been was being scraped away, leaving behind something raw, something ancient, something that wasn't quite mortal anymore. Mount Olympus was no longer just a mountain, it was alive. The cliffs shifted. The stone buckled. Wind screamed down the slopes, not with sound, but with intent. It was as if the air itself resented him, tried to throw him off, push him back, unmake him. Trees no longer grew this high. Birds did not fly this far. Even the stars above seemed to draw back, pulling their light away like spectators who couldn't watch what was coming next. He passed old ruins temples carved into the stone face of Olympus altars long forgotten. Columns that had once stood for Athena crumbled. Statues of Zeus with their eyes gouged out faces split by time and silence. That's when he realized something. The gods weren't powerful anymore. Not in the way they used to be. They were afraid. Afraid that a mortal might touch what they had hidden. Afraid that someone not born in their halls might remember what fire was for. Because fire wasn't just heat. It wasn't just light. It was rebellion. It was knowledge. It was art, story, defiance. It was the one thing the gods couldn't fully control, and so they hoarded it like dragons. And now a boy from a nameless village was climbing toward the very thing they feared most. The mountain responded. Lightning snapped above him, not to strike, but to warn. Thunder growled, not from clouds, but from the stone beneath his feet. Voices echoed in the wind, ancient and angry. They weren't words, just pressure, presence, judgment. Still he climbed. His fingers bled. His lips cracked. His breath steamed even in the thinning air. Each step was slower now, not from weakness, but from weight. Because something inside him was changing. That ember Hermes had cursed into his chest. It wasn't a wound. It was a key. It pulsed now with every heartbeat, a second rhythm deeper than blood, hotter than pain. At times he could feel it guiding him, nudging his foot to a safer ledge, whispering which rock would hold, which crevice would betray him. The flame wasn't just inside him now. It was with him. And it was watching. As he climbed into the clouds above, even the memory of forests, the wind stilled, not from mercy, but from expectation. And there it was, the summit. No marble gates, no golden archways, no legions of glowing guards. Just a clearing, still, windless, hollow, and at its center a brazier. Black stone, ancient, cracked, carved by hands no longer remembered. And within it, the eternal flame. It didn't flicker, it didn't dance. It watched. It was not red, not orange, not gold. It was white. Pure, blinding, alive, a kind of light that didn't cast shadows. Irion stepped forward. The heat didn't burn, it entered him. Like something lost being returned. His skin prickled. His breath caught. That cursed ember. Hermes placed inside him now pulsed like a heartbeat, not his own, but familiar. He reached out. And in that instant, just as his fingers brushed the edge of the flame, time had bent. He saw cities built from firelight. He saw his mother's forge blazing against the cold. He saw temples rising and falling. He saw Prometheus chained to the stone, screaming soundlessly as vultures tore into him. He saw the gods call it justice, but he knew it was fear. They weren't protecting the flame. They were protecting themselves from it. He could turn back. Let humanity learn to live without fire. Let them freeze, adapt, forget. But then he heard the wind whisper a name. Callista, his mother. The woman who wore soot like war paint. Who sang to metal. Who lit fires in more than just the forge. He remembered who he was. He grabbed the flame. And it took him. Pain wasn't the right word. Pain was too soft. This was transformation. His bones cracked, reformed. His skin glowed, then blistered, then glowed again. His veins lit like molten rivers. He dropped to his knees silent as the flame poured into him. He didn't hold it. He became it. The brazier dimmed, then went cold. Because the flame had found a new vessel, Irian collapsed. Smoke rose from his fingertips, but his eyes glowed like dawn. He breathed, barely. But with each breath, warmth spread, outward, downward, across the wind, toward the villages, the cold places, the quiet homes where children shivered in silence. He had taken the fire, but not for himself. For everyone, and the mountain knew. The wind softened, the clouds parted. Even the stone beneath his feet shifted, not in resistance, but in recognition. Irian stood. He did not descend Olympus. He carried it with him. With every step, frost melted. The air sweetened. The sky turned gentler, not because he was divine, but because he remembered what it meant to give fire, not hoard it. And the flame remembered too. It curled gently through his limbs. It didn't scorch. It stirred, like breath, like memory. He wasn't whole. His arms trembled. His legs buckled. He was becoming something else, because the eternal flame wasn't just warmth. It was remembrance. He could feel it all, the first spark in a cave before language, the torch that lit Athens, the forge that built Troy, and the wars, the destruction, the price of light. But this time he would give it not as a weapon, but as a gift. He passed the cave where Cerberus once lay. The beast was gone. Even death had stepped aside. And when he reached the first village, cold, forgotten, silent, he said nothing. He simply held out his hand, and the hearths roared to life, one by one. House by house, the fire returned. And the people didn't bow. They didn't weep. They simply gathered near the warmth, in awe, not of a god, but of a boy who had turned himself into the thing the gods feared most. Hope. Irian did not live long after that. But he did not die either, because fire never really dies. It only spreads. And from that day on, wherever a fire lit gently in the night, people whispered his name. Not in worship, in gratitude. Not long after the flame returned to the world, strange things began to happen. In a fishing village, where no boats had launched for weeks, because of the frozen tide, the dock workers found their ropes suddenly warm to the touch, their nets steaming faintly in the dawn. Hearths that had been stone cold for years flickered back to life before anyone touched flint to kindling. No one could explain it. In mountain hamlets, shepherds claimed they saw a figure walking along the ridgelines in the middle of the night, a boy with glowing skin and smoke curling from his shoulders. In the cities, blacksmiths swore their forges heated faster than ever before, and no coal or bellows could explain it. Children began dreaming of light, of a voice whispering in their ears, singing lullabies made of fire. They didn't know Irian's name, but they felt him, and in time they remembered. No tomb was ever built for him, no statue carved, no epic sung. There was no procession, no mourning, no final battle to mark his passing. And yet, he never disappeared. In the valley where Callista's forge once stood, travelers claimed to hear a hammer striking at midnight. When they followed the sound, they found no blacksmith, just the forge glowing white-hot, untouched for decades. One man swore he saw a boy at the anvil humming a lullaby older than any song he knew. When he blinked, the boy was gone, but the coals still danced. Even the gods high atop Olympus felt it. The brazier they had once guarded like a crown sat empty, now its warmth drawn away. Olympus trembled not with rage, but something worse realization. They had been dethroned, not with spears or armies, but with kindness. Irian hadn't stolen the flame for himself. He had returned it to everyone, and in doing so, he reminded the gods not what they ruled, but why they mattered in the first place. Some stories say that when your fire dims for no reason, it's Irian passing through. Others claim that if you press your ear close to a crackling hearth late at night, you can hear the rhythm of a hammer tapping gently on an anvil, slow, steady, eternal. Irian didn't live forever. He became warmth itself. And somewhere in the world, while that story was still finding its shape in the hearts of dreamers and firemakers, another story was quietly beginning. Far to the south, where the hills flatten into stone and the laws grow sharper than swords, there lived a girl named Leonthe. Sparta did not raise gentle daughters. By the time Leonthe could walk, she was already learning to wrestle. By 10, she could outfight her brothers. By 12, she led her first hunting party into the Titus Mountains and returned with 3 wild boars tied behind her chariot. By 16, she had more scars than words. The other Spartans admired her. They respected her. Some feared her. She moved through the agora with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. She wore her armor like a second skin. Her voice was sharp, her silences sharper. And yet, there was something in her that didn't quite fit. When the torches were extinguished and the training grounds emptied, Leonthe would walk alone. She'd climb the cliffs above the river Eurotas, under the moonlight, her boots leaving no sound behind her, and she would stare not at the stars, like a warrior studying the gods for omen, but like a child, wondering, dreaming. Sparta didn't have a name for what she felt. It wasn't ambition. It wasn't conquest. It was something older, softer. Something buried deep beneath her ribs under the scars and muscle, a question. Was this all there was? And then one night, under a sky so silver it looked scraped from the edge of a blade, she saw it. A swan. It glided across a pool nestled deep in a hidden grove, where moonlight rippled like silk on its back. The swan did not flee. It watched her, unmoving, silent, beautiful in a way no war cry could match. Its feathers shimmered not white, not grey, but something in between. Its eyes were not the eyes of an animal. There was no fear in them, no wildness, only knowing. She stepped toward the water, her hand resting on the dagger at her thigh. The swan tilted its head. She knelt. Something stirred inside her, something she didn't know she'd been missing until that moment. Connection. The swan did not move as she reached out. Her fingertips brushed its feathers. They were warm, unnaturally warm, like sunlight wrapped in silk. She felt a thrum beneath her skin, a humming, as though something invisible had awakened inside her and remembered its name. The swan blinked, turned, and glided back into the lake. She remained there, kneeling at the water's edge long after the moon had risen fully. She did not know what had begun, only that it had. She returned the next full moon, and the one after that. Each time the swan was waiting. No words were exchanged, no promises made, just presence, silence, stillness. She began to speak eventually, quietly. Not like a soldier, but like a woman who had never been heard before. She spoke of her father, the great commander Adrastos, who had taught her to fight but not to feel. Of victories that left her hollow. Of nights she spent staring at the stars, wondering why they never answered. The swan said nothing, but it listened. And Leonthe, who had never trusted silence before, began to find comfort in it. She brought offerings, figs, soft cloth, little trinkets carved from olive wood. The swan never touched them, but still she offered. She braided her hair before each visit. She sat beside the water for hours, sometimes shoulder to wing, sometimes saying nothing at all. She began to hum, not war songs, lullabies. Not for the swan, for herself. And still it stayed. Never aged, never changed. Never fled. There were stories, of course, whispers passed down in dim taverns from priestesses and old fishermen of gods, who took the form of animals to trick mortals, to seduce them, to ruin them. Leonthe knew these stories, but she didn't believe in them. She believed in the way her hand curved perfectly to the line of the swan's neck, in the way it tilted its head when she sang, in the way it always waited. And somewhere deep beneath the silence a truth began to bloom. She didn't speak it, not even to herself, but she knew she was in love, and the swan loved her back. In Sparta, solitude was tolerated, but only in small doses. A warrior might walk alone, before battle kneel in silence before the gods, or meditate on strategy beneath a tree. but to disappear regularly, to slip away every full moon without explanation, without order or permission. That was something else entirely. At first, no one questioned Leonti. She was, after all, the daughter of Commander Adrastos. Her loyalty was carved into every scar, her discipline unquestioned. But as weeks turned into months and her absences continued, whispers began. She wanders. She's distracted. She hesitates before striking. Her movement on the training field was still swift, but not as sharp. Her commands were still followed, but her voice lacked venom. She smiled sometimes when no one was speaking. She looked up at the sky more often. Her eyes, once honed for blood and battle, had softened just slightly, but enough. Commander Adrastos noticed. He summoned her one evening under the pretense of strategy. But when the room was cleared, his voice grew cold. "What keeps you from sleep?" Leonti said nothing. He narrowed his eyes. "Do not forget who you are." But that was the problem, wasn't it? She already had. Or rather, she had remembered who she was before Sparta molded her. What the city had forged in bronze and blood, the swan had touched with feather and stillness. And now, Leonti could not return to who she'd been, would not. Still Sparta watched. One patrol followed her past the city walls, keeping to the shadows. They lost her near the olive groves. She was too skilled, too quiet, too purposeful. But it was enough. Enough to breed suspicion. Enough to spark fear. Priests began muttering about omens, about the moonlight, whispering names, about lakes that stirred without wind, about women whose eyes reflected starlight instead of firelight. Rumors spread. She's seen something. She's consorting with the gods. She's cursed. Leonti knew the walls were closing in, that eyes were finally learning to look where they once looked away, that her silence, once a mark of strength, now made her vulnerable. But still she went. Still she walked the moonlit path to the grove. Still she found him. The swan waited always in the same place, just beyond the shallows, surrounded by crescent-shaped trees silvered by moonlight, and in that space-time seemed to fold. The war cries faded, the orders quieted, the rules sharp as spears dulled. Only one thing mattered not being seen, because if anyone discovered what she knew, it would destroy them both. The moon was heavy that night, low and golden like a dying flame. Leonti stood in her chamber hands, trembling over her armor. She could not fasten the final clasp. Her breath hitched. Her stomach twisted. Something had changed. She had felt it for days, a low hum beneath her skin, a pressure in her chest like a truth trying to break free. The swan had been different last time, restless, watchful. Its feathers had bristled when the wind shifted. It circled her twice before settling at her side. Its warmth, once comforting, had been sharp, electric, urgent. That night sleep would not come, and when it finally did, it brought visions. She stood in a silver grove, hands coated in gold dust. Before her stood a statue, part man, part swan, wings frozen mid-beat, eyes wide and lifeless. She reached out, spoke a name she didn't know she knew. Apollo. The statue cracked. A voice echoed not from the sky, but from inside her bones. Truth will freeze what love has kindled. She woke, gasping, heart thundering, the name still burning on her tongue. Apollo. She tried to brush it away. A dream, nothing more. But warriors knew when fear was real. And this wasn't fear. This was a prophecy. The next day she left Sparta earlier than usual. She didn't follow her normal path. Her feet moved on instinct deeper into the hills through trees she'd never passed before. And then hidden beneath ivy and moss she found it. An altar. Old, cracked, forgotten. Carved into its face, flaking with age. Apollot. Her breath caught. The warmth of the swan. Its knowing eyes. The way it shimmered untouched by time. It wasn't enchanted. It was a god, and she had spoken his name. Behind her feathers rustled. The swan stood in the grove, watching, but it no longer shimmered. Its glow dimmed. It looked tired, ancient, sad, as if it had been waiting for this moment. Leonti stepped forward, mouth open, words tangled in her throat. "I know," she whispered. The air stopped moving. A single feather drifted from the swan's back. It touched the altar and turned to dust. Then came the change. The swan's neck arched, not in grace, but in agony. Its body trembled. Feathers unraveled into streams of gold and light. Wings bent into arms. Webbed feet split into toes that dug into earth. And where the swan had stood, now knelt a man. Apollo? Naked, radiant, broken. His hair shimmered like sunrise. His skin glowed faintly like embers beneath marble. But his eyes were full of sorrow. Leonti stepped back, hand over her mouth. She had loved him in silence, and now silence had become unbearable. He tried to speak. His voice cracked like thunder too old to roar. You weren't supposed to know, he said. It was the only rule. She fell to her knees beside him. I didn't mean to, she whispered. He smiled just once. Not joy, not pity. Farewell. I know. The ground shuddered. No noise. Just a sentence passed without mercy. His glow faded. His limbs stiffened. Apollo began to turn to stone. She grasped his hands, still warm, still trembling, but she could feel it. The stone creeping like frost over flesh. His fingers curled around hers, and then stopped. She shook her head. No, this can't be how it ends. But the curse didn't listen. It had waited centuries, and now it did its work. His chest rose once more, then didn't. His wings half-formed behind his shoulders froze mid-fold. His face, still beautiful, still kind, caught between love and pain. His eyes open but unseeing. Then silence. Not peace, not calm. Loss. Leonti knelt there for hours, forehead pressed to his cold stone hand. Her tears slid down the side of his marble fingers and fell to the earth slow and steady. The grove dimmed. The moon, so often bright, retreated behind a veil of cloud. No lightning came. No god appeared. The punishment was done. Zeus had spoken. Apollo, god of light, was now a statue of silence, forever frozen in the moment of his final truth. And Leonti, she never returned to Sparta. She removed her sword, let it lie beside the altar, took off her armor, let it rust in the grass, and stayed, not as a warrior, not as a daughter, just as a woman, beside the one she loved, beside the one she lost. Each full moon she returned, never missed one. No offerings, no prayers, just herself and a memory. She would sit beside the statue of Apollo, fingers brushing the stone hand she once held in flesh. Sometimes she spoke, sometimes she hummed. Other times she simply watched the water and said nothing. The villagers began to whisper. They said a woman haunted the hills, that she wandered under moonlight with eyes like distant stars. Some said she had gone mad. Others said she had been chosen, but no one disturbed her. No one dared. Years passed. She grew older, but never frail. Her strength remained not like a soul, but like roots. Deep, steady. The statue never changed. Apollo mid-kneel, mid-reach, mid-loss. But some travelers claimed, if you placed your hand on his chest, you could feel a heartbeat, faint, like a dream. And then one final full moon, Leonti came. She sat beside him longer than usual, laid her head gently on his shoulder, and never moved again. The villagers found her weeks later. She was seated just as she had been for years, upright, serene, as if simply resting. Her head leaned gently against Apollo's shoulder, her silver-streaked hair braided with care. Her eyes were closed, her face peaceful. No tension in her limbs, no sign of struggle or fear, just stillness, the kind that comes not from silence but from something finished. Around her the grove felt different. The wind did not move the trees. The leaves hung motionless, suspended in reverence. Even the birds who often flitted quietly through the branches were absent. There was only the soft murmur of the lake lapping against the shore like a breath. The villagers didn't touch her, didn't bury her, didn't try to move her or separate her from the god she had loved. Instead, they let the grove become what it was always meant to be. A sacred place. A quiet place. No shrine was built. No marble statues, no plaques, no offerings of honeyed wine or coins, but stories bloomed. They said if you stood on the edge of the grove under a full moon, you could see the shimmer of her hair in the dark, that her spirit had not left, only settled, rooted, that she was now part of the earth she had knelt on for so long. And they said Apollo, still frozen in mid-reach, his wings half-formed, his eyes forever open, had changed. Not in stone, in presence. The statue shimmered faintly as though lit from within, a glow that was not quite light, not quite illusion, just enough to make travelers pause and wonder if the marble was still marble, or something else entirely. Some claimed that on certain nights, if you closed your eyes and leaned close to his chest, you could hear a song, not sung, remembered. The story spread, farther than Sparta. across city walls, over merchant roads, down coastlines where fishermen lit fires and whispered old names into the waves. They spoke of a love that had defied silence, a woman who had loved a God not with worship but with waiting, and a God who had forgotten his form but not his heart. And somewhere beyond those roads and hills, another story was already being told, one not of fire or feathers, but of sound. A boy named Melanion was born beneath a willow tree during a storm so loud it split the sky in two. His mother, the daughter of a midwife, swaddled him in a linen wrap as thunder rolled over the hills. He didn't cry. Not once. He hummed. From the moment he could walk, music followed him. Streams whispered melodies when he knelt to drink. Leaves trembled in harmony as he passed. Birds tilted their heads at him, confused and captivated. He didn't need teachers. He didn't need lessons. Sound belonged to him the way fire had belonged to Irion, the way moonlight had belonged to Leonthe. By 10, he could mimic any bird call. By 12, he could coax tears from even the toughest soldier with a simple melody on a reed flute. By 16, he played the lyre with such grace that enemies paused mid-swing just to listen. He sang of rivers, of morning, of fields before war. His voice soothed fevers, stilled nightmares, softened hearts that had been hard for generations. He never claimed to be divine, but others did. Child of the Muses, they called him. A vessel of Orpheus reborn. Melanion never argued, he just kept playing. He traveled from village to village, accepting no coin. He sang in forums on hilltops in the shadows of broken temples. He sang for beggars and kings alike. But one evening, by a glimmering river where even frogs had gone quiet, he strummed a melody about starlight, and everything changed. The wind stopped. The air stilled. And then they arrived. 9 women, cloaked in shimmering fabric that shifted like smoke. They stepped from behind the veil of the world, not walking but emerging, as though they had always been there. The Muses, Calliope, Clio, Erato, Polyhymnia, and the others whose names were older than history. They did not smile. They did not frown. They listened. And then together they sang back. 9 voices, perfect and full. Their harmonies were not notes, but truths. Songs older than language. Melanion closed his eyes, and without hesitation he joined them. His voice didn't echo theirs, as it changed to them. When they finished, even the stars seemed closer, brighter. Calliope the eldest touched his brow. "You are not ordinary," she said. "You are a vessel." And from that moment forward, Melanion wasn't just a bard. He was a myth in the making. The Muses took him to the folds of Mount Helicon, into groves untouched by war and ambition. There they did not teach with words, they taught with presence. Calliope showed him how to bend epics into sound. Clio whispered entire dynasties into his dreams. Terpsichore danced beside him barefoot in the leaves until his fingers learned the rhythm of her movement. Euterpe laid her flute across his palms and said only listen, and he did. He listened not just to melody, but to meaning. The ache in a mother's sigh, the pulse beneath a battlefield, the laughter of a child who had never heard music before, and he gave it back in songs that stitched broken hearts, in chords that made enemies weep, in refrains that made old gods pause mid-thought. At first he sang only for others, for farmers, for widows, for the weary. But then slowly, quietly, something shifted. He wanted more. He wanted to create something that even the gods hadn't heard. A final song. One not meant to be sung in halls or carved into stone tablets. A melody that could bend time, hold grief, and leave silence gasping. He didn't tell the Muses. He kept it to himself. Wrote in the dark, hummed to shadows, wove fragments of sound he heard in dreams. And the Muses noticed, not in his hands, in his eyes. He looked past them, through them, as if what they offered was no longer enough. One dusk, as he sat in the shadow of a tree older than Olympus, Polyhymnia spoke. "You were chosen to carry beauty," she said, "but beauty is not meant to be buried." Melanion smiled. Faintly, "I will not see it cheapened." The Muses flinched, and said nothing, because they knew. He wasn't just composing, he was hoarding, and no mortal walked beside the divine without consequence. Melanion withdrew, left cities behind, refused to perform, refused to teach, refused even to speak of his work. He traveled deep into Mount Helicon, past where even echoes dared not go. There in a cave lined with crystal, he began to shape the final song. It came in pieces, in sleep, in thunder, in silences so deep they frightened him. He didn't write it. He found it, like a secret buried in the folds of reality. The melody shifted with his breath, twisted with his heartbeat, changed when he blinked. It was not a song. It was truth. He labored for months, maybe years. Time bent around the notes. He ate little, slept less. He wept one moment, laughed the next. Not because he was losing his mind, because the music played through his soul instead of his hands. And when it was done, the world changed. Birds paused mid-flight. Trees leaned toward the windless mountain. Streams went quiet. Even Olympus held its breath. And far above, the gods listened. Even Zeus, even Hades, even the fates who never looked away from their weaving paused. They waited. The muses waited. For a single note, a whisper, a gift. But Milanion didn't return. He hid the song, and in doing so set a different music in motion, one not of sound, but of silence. The silence he left behind was not absence, it was weight. A hush that thickened the air in places where Milanion had once played. Amphitheaters that once echoed with applause now sat empty. Taverns that once begged for his songs hosted only drunk laughter and clumsy chords. He had become a myth, not through what he gave, but what he withheld. The muses watched from a distance. They did not interfere yet. They had seen mortals fall to pride before, seen genius turn to madness. But Milanion had not failed yet. He had simply vanished. He lived alone now deep in the heart of Mount Helicon, in the crystalline cave where his final song had first begun to whisper itself into him. No fire burned there. No food simmered on stone. The light came from the walls themselves, shimmering softly, like a lullaby wrapped in glass. Each night he sang the final song, not aloud, in dreams. There it was always perfect. And there it always vanished by dawn. It began subtly. One night he woke, unable to recall the final refrain. The next he forgot the opening chord. Soon he could not remember anything but the fact that the song existed, that he had heard it, that it had moved him. But the notes, gone. He tried to write it down. His hands refused. He tried to hum it. His breath faltered. It wasn't writer's block. It was a curse. He had buried a gift meant to be shared, and the gods who endure madness, war, and worship without blinking do not abide theft. So the punishment came, not with fire, not with thunder, but with memory. Each night, Milanion heard the song again clearer than before, more beautiful than anything the world had ever known. It wrapped him in sound, lifted him through stars, wove him into oceans. He wept, he surrendered, and then he awoke, and forgot. Every morning the notes dissolved. Like mist in sunlight, he stopped performing, stopped speaking, stopped eating. His home grew cold. Dust layered on strings, left untouched. The lyre once cradled like a child lay in the corner, one string snapped another, slowly warping. Friends came, begged him to play again. He only said not yet. Only the muses knew the truth. You were given a gift, said Erato, standing in shadow, and you chose to bury it. He will never remember it now, whispered Polyhymnia, eyes downcast. The fates didn't intervene. They simply adjusted the thread. Milanion became a ghost of himself, thin, hollow-eyed, gaunt. He wandered from town to town like a beggar, not for food, but for remembrance. Have you heard it? He would ask strangers in the street. The song with no beginning and no end. People pitied him, then feared him. Some threw stones, others fled. And still he asked. He would sing fragments, melodies that made no sense, that seemed to skip like broken records. He begged children to hum anything they dreamed of the night before. He once followed a girl across 2 villages because she sang a tune that vaguely resembled a fragment he'd once heard in sleep. She cried. He apologized and wept for hours. The song never returned in the daylight, only in dreams. But the dreams grew clearer. He could hear the song's texture, its rhythm, its truth. He just couldn't bring it back. Not into the world, not even into a whisper. He tried everything. He hired scribes to sleep beside him, seers to pry it from his mind. He sang into mirrors. He locked himself in a dark room, refusing to speak, hoping that silence would make the song linger. It never worked. Each sunrise brought only forgetting. His voice began to fray. At first it cracked, then it rasped. Then it simply left. He hummed. That was all he had. Hums and fragments and frantic scribbles on parchment he later tore apart. He screamed at the sky. He begged the gods for forgiveness. But the gods had already turned away. They had given the world the song. And Melanion had tried to keep it for himself. Now he was the only one who could hear it, and he would never remember it. People spoke of him in whispers. Don't end up like Melanion, they'd say to young musicians. He had become a warning, not of madness, of greed. Even the muses stopped visiting. Only Calliope remained watching silently from afar. This is not vengeance, she whispered to the stars one night. This is balance. The song had not been taken. It had simply been removed from him. Now it drifted, woven into the wind, into lullabies sung by mothers who didn't know where the melody came from, into the strings of young bards who for just one moment played something divine and then forgot. The final song was not locked away. It had been set free. Melanion never knew, not truly. He only chased. Every night it came. Every dawn it left. And so he wandered, barefoot, thin as twilight, muttering broken phrases, humming to stones and trees. Children ran from his shadow. Once he stood in a marketplace and screamed, "It's in the clouds, don't you hear it?" No one answered, except a boy, a small one. He looked up, tilted his head. "I hear it when I sleep." Melanion fell to his knees, sobbing. "Then you must hold it, you must remember." But the boy didn't understand. He only said, "I forget it when I wake up." And Melanion laughed, a hollow echoing sound. "That's the curse," he whispered. "That's the price." He did not sleep to rest anymore. He slept only to hear. And when he did, he smiled. For just a moment he remembered what it meant to be whole. Then the sun rose, and it vanished. And so he walked, not toward healing, not toward redemption, just forward, with no name, no memory, only music that no longer belonged to him, and silence that always would. He wandered without direction, barefoot, along dusty roads and overgrown footpaths. Towns passed in a blur. Faces changed and blurred again. No one recognized him now, not the boy born humming under the willow tree, not the bard who once made hardened warriors weep in silence. He was gaunt hollow, a shadow stitched to flesh. His once golden voice, once revered by kings and whispered about in bathhouses and temples alike, had become a brittle rasp heard only in half-sung, half-choked phrases no one could follow. He didn't seek food. He didn't seek shelter. Only sleep. Sleep was the only gate left between him and the song. So, each night, he laid his head where he could on worn steps under leaning trees, in the corners of quiet chapels where the incense had long since gone cold, and waited for it. And it always came, the final song. It never failed him in dreams. It wrapped around him like a lover's touch, familiar and forgiving. It lifted him above the world, above memory, above pain. In the dream he always smiled, and when he woke he always wept. He tried to fight the curse. He tried to beat it with cleverness. Once he sang into a bowl of water, hoping the vibrations would remain when he woke. Once he chewed sacred herbs to see if the taste could trap the melody in his mouth. Once he begged a seer to dream with him, to follow the song into the realm of night and bring it back for him. But no magic worked. The curse was airtight. He could hear it, but never carry it. He could feel it, but never speak it. And that was what undid him. Not the silence, but the memory of sound. He remembered that something beautiful lived just out of reach. He just couldn't prove it. He just couldn't recall a single note. And so hope, which had once been his anchor, slowly began to rot, into obsession, into madness, into a kind of unraveling that had no edges. He no longer counted the days, only the nights. Each evening he would close his eyes with trembling anticipation, and each morning he would scream into the sky. Once a baker found him curled beside her oven, muttering, "Don't let the light rise. Don't let it steal it." He no longer spoke to people. He spoke to trees, to rivers, to the stars. He sang to his own reflection in puddles, demanding it sing back. He once believed a child had hummed a note from the final song while skipping stones. He followed the family for 3 days, collapsed in the dust, begged the boy to hum again. But it had only been a skipping tune, nothing more. He wept for hours. He laughed too, and wept again. The muses watched from afar. They did not interfere. Their hearts ached, but they knew this was the cost. "This is not cruelty," said Calliope. "It is consequence." He hoarded the divine, whispered Cleo, and now he is haunted by its shadow. Still Melanion walked. He no longer resembled a bard. His robes hung in tatters, his feet bled freely, his hands trembled. His lyre, his once beloved lyre, he carried still, though most of its strings had snapped. He never replaced them. He didn't need them anymore. In dreams he didn't play. He became the song. His fingers were chords. His breath was melody. And each dawn, Gone. Wiped clean. A perfect ghost of memory. The villagers began to say he hummed in his sleep, that if you placed your ear near his mouth at midnight, you could hear a song unlike anything sung on earth, but only in darkness, only when the dream held him. He no longer cared if others understood. He no longer looked for students, or audience, or comfort. Only a place to rest his head, only the chance to hear it one more time. And always the same cycle. Ecstasy, silence. Ecstasy, silence. Until even that hurt too much. One evening under a violet sky where seabirds wheeled over dark cliffs, Melanian came to a place with no name, just a ledge of stone, a wide horizon, and the ocean below. He sat, not to beg, not to sleep, not even to remember, just to rest. The breeze tangled in his hair what little remained of it. His hands worn thin by time and tension rested in his lap. He didn't weep, he didn't hum, he simply stared at the horizon, and finally closed his eyes. The dream came instantly, no delay, no fog. The song met him immediately, rich, full, unburdened. But it was different. This time he didn't just hear it, he stood in it. The ground beneath his feet pulsed like strings. The sky shimmered with starlit harmony. The wind whispered harmony, and the trees joined in with ancient rhythm. The song wasn't beside him. It was within him. He saw every note he had forgotten. He saw it unfolding not like a scroll but like a world. He realized he had never been the song's keeper. He had only been its doorway, its witness. And now in the dream he finally let go. No fear, no hunger, no need to remember, just being. When the sun rose, Melanian did not stir. The wind curled gently around his body, carrying something away, something not seen, not heard, but felt. A shepherd found him hours later leaning peacefully against the rock, his face calm, his hands resting on his chest as if cradling something invisible. There was no parchment, no sound, no monument, only birds wheeling overhead in odd looping spirals as if dancing to music only they could hear. The villagers buried him beneath a lone olive tree near the cliff where he last slept. No priest performed rites, no crowd gathered, just the shepherd. And the quiet. But silence has a way of holding memory, of honoring what cannot be sung. And so the story did not end. In the years that followed, people began to whisper, not of Melanian himself, his name faded from mouths worn smooth by time, but of strange things that happened near the cliff where the olive tree grew. Travelers claimed that if you stood there on a new moon with no torch in hand, no music on your lips, and no one watching, the wind might carry a sound. Not a full song, not a melody, just a note, brief, fleeting, heartbreakingly beautiful, so soft it might be mistaken for breath. But it wasn't breath, it was remembrance. Children began dreaming of music they'd never heard. They'd wake crying or laughing or both with no idea why. Their parents would hush them gently not because they were afraid, but because something in their hearts knew. Musicians would sometimes wake at midnight with tears on their cheeks, a sense of having just heard something sacred, but not a single chord remained. And sometimes when a bard sat alone at dusk, tuning their strings with no audience and no plan, their fingers would move suddenly, almost involuntarily, and play something not their own. Something perfect. They never remembered it by morning. The muses said nothing. They did not curse another bard. They did not try to reclaim the song, because they understood what Melanian had become, not a warning, not a tragedy, a vessel, turned legend. He had refused to share yes, had hoarded the divine, had fallen into silence, but in the end he had surrendered. And in that surrender the song had been set free. It didn't live in scrolls or temples. It didn't echo from amphitheaters. It could not be studied, taught, or copied. It lived instead, in the hush between notes, in the catch of breath before a chord is struck, in the silence that falls just before someone says, listen. It lived in the way the sea sounds different when you're grieving, in the way the wind carries voices you haven't heard in years, in the shiver you feel when someone plays something you swear you've never heard and yet somehow remember. The final song was never meant to be owned. It was meant to be felt, and now it drifted through the world not as music but as moment. The kind of moment that makes time slow down, the kind that makes you cry without knowing why, the kind that feels like remembering something too ancient for language. Melanian had become part of that. Not a sound, a space. The space between forgetting and knowing, the silence where truth waits. And those who feel it even for a moment never forget what follows. Not the melody, but the absence, the echo They say the olive tree on the cliff still grows, though no one tends it. Its branches bend toward the sea, as if straining to hear something just beyond the horizon. And if you sit there alone when the sky is darkest and the world is most quiet, you might hear a sound that doesn't belong to this world. Just a fragment, just a breath. And if you're listening carefully enough, you'll understand why Millennium never let it go, and why in the end he did. Long after the last of the fires were lit in Irion's name, long after Leonte and Apollo's love had settled into stone, and long after Millennium's song drifted through the forgotten corners of wind and memory, the world changed. Not all at once, not loudly, but slowly, softly, like warmth returning to fingers gone numb. The myths became quiet truths. The truths became half-remembered lullabies, and the lullabies became feelings, flickers of emotion in the hearts of people who had never heard the names Irion, Leonte, or Millennium but felt them anyway. A child warming their hands by the hearth on a winter night might shiver not from cold, but from something familiar in the way the flames danced. A widow might pause beside a statue of a god whose name had been worn away by time and feel her chest tighten, not from grief, but from recognition. A young bard might sit at the edge of a well and hum a tune they swear they made up, only to find an old man weeping nearby saying he heard that very song the night his daughter was born. These weren't miracles, they were echoes, and the gods, those who remained on Olympus' thrones, weathered, and spirits dulled, listened differently now. They no longer raged when mortals touched what was once divine, because something in them remembered that the world had not been saved by war, or prophecy, or sacrifice. It had been saved by giving. Irion gave warmth. Leonte gave loyalty. Millennium at last gave surrender, and the world in return began to glow again. The eternal flame, once chained to the summit of Olympus, now flickered in every corner of the world, not with fire alone, but with a meaning. In every shared blanket passed to a stranger, in every song hummed between friends on a long walk home, in every pause between heartbeats when someone almost says, "I love you," and means it. These things weren't myths anymore. They were reminders of what we lost, and what we chose to give back. And perhaps if you look close enough, you'll see them again. The boy who never cried, walking barefoot through frost, leaving warmth in his wake. The warrior who gave up everything for love that never asked for anything. The bard who sang the song only in sleep and gave it to the world by letting it go. They are not gods. They were never meant to be. They are something far older than divinity. They are memory, fire, stillness, sound. And they live on not in scrolls or marble, but in the quiet moments, the small kindnesses, the silence before the song begins. There was once a scholar, an old man with too many scrolls and not enough sleep, who tried to compile every version of the myths. He had heard the name Irion whispered in the mountain towns of the north, spoken like a blessing over winter fires. He had heard stories of a marble statue in a hidden grove that shimmered under the full moon, always with a woman seated beside it. And in one seaside tavern he heard a bard play a single perfect chord that made the whole room fall still. And forget it, the moment it ended. He did not know what to make of these. The scrolls held no record. The temples offered no answers. But when he asked an old woman tending a fire in her small hut if she had ever heard of Irion, her face softened. "My grandmother told me," she said, "that when the nights are coldest, it means he's near, watching, listening." And when he asked a potter about the grove and the statue of Apollo, the man simply nodded. My uncle never went back after he saw it. He said he didn't want to disturb love. The scholar wrote everything down, but the words felt small. Every time he tried to put the stories into clean lines and tidy endings, they slipped through him, because these weren't stories that ended. They were stories that lingered. He tried to find the final song. He traveled to the cliffs, slept beneath the olive tree, waited for the melody that had ruined a bard. He never heard it. But on his final morning there, as he brewed tea over a quiet fire, a wren landed nearby and chirped 3 quick notes. The scholar froze. He knew them, not from any book, from a dream he couldn't remember. He wept without knowing why. He packed his scrolls and never tried to write it all down again. Instead, he passed the stories on, to children by campfires, to travelers beside rivers, to anyone who would sit long enough to listen. And the world continued. It grew louder, busier. New gods arrived, gods of coin and glass of gears and glow. But the old ones never left. They simply learned to whisper. The eternal flame still flickers. It's in the baker's oven at dawn when bread rises just in time to be shared with someone lonely. It's in the warmth of a blanket placed gently over someone who didn't ask. It's in the silence between a question and an honest answer. And in that silence, sometimes the wind sings, not loudly, not clearly, just a hum, a memory, a story that doesn't end, because Irian still walks smoke on his shoulders and fire in his bones, because Leonte still sits by Apollo, her head on his stone shoulder, both of them unmoved and unmoving, except in the hearts of those who believe in love without reward, because Millennium still sings quietly, brokenly beautifully, just beyond the reach of waking. They are not dead. They are not immortal. They are here, in every flame that warms without burning, in every gaze that sees without asking, in every note that plays in your dreams and vanishes by morning. And if ever you find yourself beside a fire that dances too gently beside someone you love too quietly, or humming a tune you don't remember learning, pause, listen. You're not alone. And when you do pause, when the noise of the world dims just enough for your heart to catch its breath, you may begin to feel it. The thread, it runs beneath your feet, silent and golden, woven through the fabric of everything, through ash and ember, through memory and lullaby, through footsteps left by those whose names were never etched into marble but linger still in the warmth of ordinary things. That thread ties the stories together, not because the characters ever met, but because they knew the same ache. Irian knew what it was to carry the weight of salvation and choose to share it even at the cost of himself. Leonte knew what it was to see truth and love tangled in a moment too tender to survive. Melania knew the temptation to keep beauty caged and the agony that followed. Different choices, different paths, but the same longing, the same fire, the same silence. And still the world turns. People forget. Temples fall, names blur, but the thread endures. It hums in the spaces we never think to look in the glance between friends who haven't spoken in years. In the final note of a lullaby, a mother hums without knowing where she learned it. In a statue you find in the woods, with moss climbing its chest and birds nesting in its hair, and for a reason you cannot explain you reach out and touch it. In the crackle of a fire that you swear is whispering to you. In the pause before sleep, when your body is still, but your mind opens a door you forgot was there. The thread finds you. It doesn't demand anything. It doesn't beg to be believed. It simply offers a moment, a spark, a breath. And if you accept it, if you feel it pass through you, like warmth in a cold room, you become a vessel too. Not for greatness, not for glory, for remembrance. You don't need to carry their stories in full. You only need to carry the feeling that something beautiful existed once, that someone gave up everything to protect it, that it can still be found not on mountaintops, not in palaces, not in scrolls, but in the spaces between. You see, myths were never meant to be shouted. They were meant to be shared, like bread, like fire, like song. And if someday a stranger sits beside you and begins to hum a tune you know but can't name, don't ask them where it came from. Just smile and hum along, because that's all the myth ever needed from you. To listen, to carry, to pass it on. The truth is, the myths never belonged to the gods. Not really. They lived in gods, yes. Took shape in divine forms. Danced in marble halls and glowed in braziers atop mountains that scraped the sky. But they were kept alive by mortals, by blacksmiths who sang to fire, by warriors who knelt to stone for love, by bards who let the wind take their songs rather than see them hoarded. The myths were not about thunder or conquest. They were about what we do with silence, what we do with loss, what we do when we're given a gift that's too big for our hands and must decide whether to keep it or offer it. The gods may have sparked the stories, but people carried them, whispered them at night when the fires grew low, braided them into lullabies, carved them into stone only to forget the meaning generations later, yet still feel something stir in their bones when they pass the ruins. And perhaps that's the most important thing the old stories still know. That feeling precedes memory. That even if a name fades, the feeling it left behind can linger forever. Just ask the blacksmiths of Myene. Most of them have never heard of Irian. The old forge has long since collapsed, nothing more than a few fire-scored stones under wildflowers. But every so often, when a particularly stubborn piece of metal softens too quickly beneath the hammer, they pause. They don't know why. They just feel grateful. And they ask no questions. In distant groves, where no paths lead and no maps dare mark, people speak of a marble statue standing alone its wings unfinished, its eyes fixed forever on an empty patch of grass. They don't know who he is, but some leave small offerings there anyway. Figs, feathers, bits of thread. And sometimes, just sometimes, a young girl will sit beside him without knowing why, her head resting against the cold stone shoulder, and feel something soften in her chest. She won't speak. She won't move. But when she returns home, she'll braid her hair with unusual care and spend more time looking at the stars. As for the final song, it's never played in concert halls. It's never found in written scores. But in every corner of the world there are sudden melodies that appear and disappear. A shepherd humming while tending his flock, unaware that the notes have never been written. A baker tapping a rhythm against the dough that lingers like déjà vu. A child playing with a stringed instrument who plucks one chord, just one, that makes the room fall still. They don't know their echoes. They don't know a bard once gave up everything for a song he could only hear in sleep. But that's the point. The myth was never meant to be owned, only felt, only given. So when we ask why these stories still exist, why we still return to ancient names, to fire and feathers and forgotten melodies, the answer isn't preservation. It's transformation. Each time the story is retold, it becomes something new. Each time it stirs a heart, it finds new meaning. Each time someone listens in silence and feels without needing to understand. The myth breathes again. Iri and Leonti and Melanion were not perfect. They didn't win. They didn't even survive, not in the traditional sense. But they changed something, and in doing so became the kind of story that doesn't end. Not because it can't, because it shouldn't. Because the world is still cold sometimes, still cruel, still out in all the wrong ways. And we still need the warmth of an unearned fire, the comfort of a silent companion who stays, the ache of a melody just beyond memory. We need myths not to escape reality, but to hold it gently, to remind us what it means to feel deeply and act anyway, to walk barefoot into the snow carrying fire you cannot keep, to sit beside someone turning to stone knowing you can't save them and stay anyway, to hum the most beautiful song you've ever heard and accept that no one else will ever hear it the way you did. That is what myth offers. Not glory, but glow. And in a world that forgets so easily, that rushes past silence, that trades stillness for speed, glow is a kind of rebellion. And every time you choose to pause, to warm someone's hands, to tell someone they matter even if they don't believe you yet, to write something beautiful without asking for applause, you continue the myth. You become part of the thread, the one that winds through time like a hidden river, the one that remembers even when we don't, the one that keeps glowing even when the world goes dark again. And one day, maybe not today, maybe not for years, a stranger will sit beside your fire. They'll say they've been cold for a long time, and you'll offer them warmth without asking for thanks. Because long ago, someone did the same for you. And in that moment, you'll hum a tune you've never learned, and the fire will flicker, and the silence will shimmer, and something old will smile, because the myth lives on, and you are part of it now. By the time the myths become whispers, you'll hardly notice the change. You'll pass a lantern glowing faintly in the window of a cottage and feel comfort though no one stands inside. You'll hear the scrape of metal in a far-off forge and feel your chest tighten with longing even if you've never held a hammer in your life. You'll find yourself staring at the moon, whispering the name of someone you've never met, someone you only know from a feeling, and somehow that will be enough. Because the myths are no longer just stories. They are layers. Soft veils of emotion stretched across our world like starlight quiet patient waiting to be noticed. And those who carry them rarely know they do. The boy who hums in his sleep and wakes crying. The woman who refuses to leave a statue's side because something in her tells her she knows him. The musician who writes a melody they forget by morning but leaves the paper out anyway just in case someone else remembers. They are all part of it. All vessels. And what binds them isn't fate or prophecy or even divine favor. It's the choice. The choice to keep something sacred alive without reward, without recognition, and without any promise that it will be remembered. Just because it should be. That's what Irian did when he walked down the mountain knowing he would burn away. That's what Leonti did when she laid her head on stone and stayed. That's what Melanion did when he finally stopped chasing and simply let the song sing through the world without him. And that's what you do when you tell someone a story that made you feel something, even if you can't remember all the words, even if the names slip, even if you fall asleep halfway through, because the myth doesn't need to be told perfectly. It just needs to be carried in your hands when you light a candle for no reason. In your heart when you pause before speaking and let the silence stretch a little longer. In your eyes when you see someone hurting and say nothing but stay anyway. It's in all of us now, and it will outlive us all. Because warmth outlives fire. Because stillness outlives stone. Because true music never dies. It just waits for the next dreamer, the next listener, the next person willing to give something beautiful away. So now, as your breathing slows and your thoughts begin to soften, let this story settle like ash in the quiet corners of your mind. You've heard of Irion, the boy born from fire who stole back the warmth the gods once hoarded and gave it to the world, burning himself to become what we all still carry in every flame. You've traveled with Leonthe the warrior whose silence was stronger than any blade, whose love defied Olympus, and who knelt beside a god until her breath matched his stillness. You've followed Melanion the bard, whose gift became a burden, whose voice became a curse, and who finally surrendered his masterpiece so that beauty might live on without him. And through them you felt the thread, the one that ties story to soul, silence to sound, fire to memory. This wasn't just myth. This was remembering. This was the glow that comes not from knowing everything, but from knowing enough to feel something sacred stir when you least expect it. Let it carry you now not as a weight, but as warmth. Let the fire settle behind your eyes. Let the silence feel full, not empty. And when you dream tonight, maybe you'll find yourself standing on a cliff beside an olive tree, or kneeling beside a forge that hums, or hearing a melody you swear you never learned. If you do, don't be afraid. Just listen. The myth is still singing.